Rahim. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Hello and welcome. My name is Rawan Imran, R-O-W-A-N, I-M-R-A-N, and I am completing my doctorate as a psychiatric nurse practitioner. We are healthcare workers from Phoenix, Arizona. We are members of the Arizona Palestine Solidarity Alliance Healthcare Committee and Healthcare Workers for Palestine. We are here today responding to the genocide unfolding in Gaza, which has been supported by the silence of our healthcare institutions and the diplomatic and military support from our government. Our duty to uphold medical ethics, human rights, and the sanctity of life for all demand that we stand here today. We are outraged by Israel's desecration of Al-Shifa Hospital, part of Israel's long pattern of illegally targeting medical infrastructure and healthcare workers. It is our duty to speak out against these deliberate attacks on healthcare. And as our world leaders and institutions neglect to act, we refuse to be silenced. According to the United Nations, health services in northern Gaza have been largely destroyed, and the healthcare system in southern Gaza is on the brink of collapse. Al-Shifa Hospital has refused to shut down. The Al-Shifa complex has been sheltering thousands of civilians, and the hospital continued to provide life-saving care. On March 18, the Israeli military raided Al-Shifa with tanks and gunfire, bombing the specialized surgery building and setting it on fire. By Israel's own admission, 200 Palestinians have been executed at or around Al-Shifa Hospital, and more than 800 have been abducted. In less than 6 months, Israel's genocide has killed over 32,000 Palestinians, including over 13,000 children. The actual number is almost certainly much higher. Israel has killed at least 348 healthcare workers. Hundreds more have been injured or abducted. Our medical institutions are silenced as hospitals are deliberately targeted. Patients and medical staff are forced out of the hospitals at gunpoint, and healthcare workers are tortured. Israel has massacred families waiting in line to receive food. Not just once, but repeatedly. 1 in 3 Palestinian children under the age of 2 are experiencing malnutrition, all while aid just waits miles away, blocked by Israel. After 6 months of unrelenting assaults in the most documented genocide in history, when will our leaders say, enough? Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Reporter on the occupied Palestinian territories, has said that Israel has met the threshold of committing genocide. Specifically, she stated, Israel has committed 3 acts of genocide with the requisite intent, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, and imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. We call on our institutions and our leaders to speak up and name what is being perpetrated today by Israel and facilitated, aided, and funded by the United States as genocide. This transcends borders and politics. It is a test of our collective humanity. The time for action is now. We cannot wait for more lives to be lost, for more families to be torn apart, or for more children to suffer the consequences of our inaction. Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Jaffrey.
Assalamu alaikum, welcome, hello everybody. If anybody wants to sit down, you might want to. This is, I timed myself, it's probably 11 minutes long. My name is Uzma Jaffrey, U-Z-M-A-J-A, F as in Frank, R-I, and I'm a family physician. Happy National Doctors Day to everyone except the doctors of Gaza and occupied Palestine. Ironically, today is Doctor's Day and also Land Day in Palestine. Every day, I wake up to a new story of atrocities committed in Gaza hospitals or assassinations of medical personnel working there. The World Health Organization actually cites 627 Palestinian healthcare workers killed and 167 injured. 47 ambulances have been damaged or destroyed through direct targeting, often while bringing victims of the most recent airstrikes to the hospital. There is no fully functional hospital left in Gaza. Palestinian medical personnel are not dying. People die of natural causes. There is no natural cause in genocide. Palestinian medical personnel are being murdered, and a new phenomenon we are seeing in the Gazan medical scape is kidnapping and torture of Palestinian healthcare workers from the bedside to undisclosed detention centers. There is no Doctor's Day in Gaza, certainly not a happy one, nor will there be if circumstances do not emergently change. Imagine the courage it takes to be a healthcare worker in a war zone. These individuals, driven by an unwavering commitment to save lives and alleviate suffering, work tirelessly in the face of unimaginable adversity. Yet despite their noble intentions and the sanctity of their profession, despite special protections under international humanitarian law for medical facilities, personnel, and ambulances under the Geneva Conventions, they have become targets of unjustifiable violence in Gaza. The rules of war say medical personnel must be protected and not targeted in conflict, and that injured people must be given the medical care they need to the fullest practical extent and with the least possible delay. Violence against healthcare workers whose only crime is their dedication to heal the sick and injured is a stark reminder of the brutality of occupation and the disregard for human life that accompanies it. Targeting healthcare workers and infrastructure is necessary then only to carry out genocide. While surviving Palestinians may theoretically rebuild their homes and destroyed hospitals and clinics in months, these are just buildings. But the loss of human lives, the loss of expertise of doctors, surgeons, paramedics, and nurses killed and maimed cannot be replaced for at least another generation. Gaza has been illegally, intentionally, and unnaturally stripped of the human resources that could help heal and rebuild lives. As members of the medical community, it is incumbent upon us to speak out against such atrocities and to demand justice for our fallen and missing colleagues. We cannot stand idly by while those who embody the principles of compassion and healing are tortured or killed without impunity. I want to draw attention to the cases of just a few dedicated healthcare professionals trying to fulfill their duty to humanity who were ruthlessly killed, tortured, or detained by occupation forces. If we recounted the story of each fallen colleague, we would be here for days. Not the first, but certainly a significant medical hero was the late Dr. Hamam Alo, a nephrologist who refused to evacuate Al-Shifa Hospital, stating, "You think I went to medical school and for my postgraduate degrees for a total of 14 years, so I think only about my life and not my patients?" Dr. Alo was spearheading a new kidney treatment facility in Gaza. Now that he's been killed, and much of Gaza's infrastructure obliterated, civilians needing dialysis have lost their futures. Undoubtedly, without dialysis 5 months out, they are already dead. Dr. Alo's friend is Canadian Dr. Tariq Lubani, who not incidentally was shot in both of his legs while treating peaceful protesters during Palestine's Great March of Return in 2018, far before October 7th. Dr. Lubani observed regarding medical personnel, "These men and women, when they get killed, it's also the death of all the patients they would have helped, also the death of a system." On January 29th of this year, paramedics from the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, PRCS, coordinated over several hours with occupation forces to rescue 6-year-old Hind Rajab, whose phone call for help while trapped in a car under fire, surrounded and hiding under her dead relatives, has been heard the world over. A spokesman for PRCS stated, "On arrival, the crew confirmed that they could see the car where Hind was trapped, and they could see her. The last thing we heard was continuous gunfire." When it was found days later, the ambulance was completely burnt out and its crew, Yusuf Al-Zaino and Ahmed Al-Madoun, charred to death. Needless to say, they were unable to save 6-year-old Hind. These young volunteers, as almost all healthcare workers in Gaza, are working for partial or no pay while under fire, risked and sacrificed their lives for a child, intentionally killed despite negotiations they made in good faith to fulfill their duty. This is how their good faith was rewarded. In February, pediatrician Dr. Saeed Maroof was taken hostage while working at Al-Ahli Hospital. He was blindfolded and his arms and legs zip-tied for 45 days. Now this healer has paresthesias in his hands and muscular atrophy of his legs. He lost over 50 pounds. After his release, he returned immediately to Al-Ahli Hospital, despite the risks, despite not knowing where his own wife and 5 children were. We applauded Dr. Amira Al-Asuli, an OBGYN who came out of retirement to attend patients in Gaza. Like her patients, she is also a manufactured refugee. Saving others is programmed inside us. When I see a patient in need of my help, I will not think for a second about myself, but will be there to save the life of the person, she said. And she did that. When she crouched during live sniper fire to cross the emergency bay to a civilian tent where a man lay wounded, a previous doctor who attempted to help, dead by sniper fire at his side. The video of her heroic medical evacuation of the patient went viral on February 13th, and coincidentally, her hospital was raided within 48 hours. Dr. Asuli was kidnapped by occupation forces among other healthcare workers. Her husband, also a physician, does not know her whereabouts. The disappearance of healthcare workers is a shocking new precedent. At Al-Shifa, Kamal Adwan, Al-Oda, and other hospitals in Gaza, doctors, especially those with any specialty training, have been rounded up and taken to undisclosed locations to be interrogated, tortured, and or disappeared. After a number of medical detainees were stripped naked and tortured, they were released and forced to return to the hospital in their naked conditions, then shot by live ammunition. 5 medical personnel were wounded. The whereabouts of the medical directors of these 3 hospitals, Drs. Abu Salmiya, Dr. Al-Khalot, and Dr. Mahanna, remain unknown since they were kidnapped in November while treating their patients. Dr. Abu Salmiya, director of Al-Shifa Hospital, who famously appealed to the world for intervention and help just days before his facility was bombed and sieged, was witnessed by a fellow medical detainee to, and in quotes, to be forced to walk on all fours and eat from a bowl on the floor like an animal, and that occupation forces even put a leash on him. He added that soldiers broke both his arms, end quote. This medical detainee was eventually released, but Dr. Abu Salmiya is still in custody at an undisclosed location. Such allegations of abuse against anyone, not just against a healthcare worker, are certainly violations of international humanitarian law and certainly war crimes. On November 18th, a convoy of 5 vehicles attempted to evacuate Doctors Without Borders, or MSF, staff from its main clinic in Gaza City towards southern Gaza. For anyone unfamiliar with MSF, I urge them to crawl out from under their rock and get to know an internationally renowned medical organization that is a household name for healthcare workers. The MSF convoy was stopped at a military checkpoint and fired upon later as it attempted to return to the clinic. An MSF volunteer and a family member were killed in the attack. MSF said their vehicles were also intentionally damaged and destroyed by occupation bulldozers and tanks in the days following the convoy attack. Their calls for an independent investigation have gone unheeded. Violence in Gaza is not an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of oppression. It is a symptom of the broader humanitarian crisis in Gaza and occupied Palestine. Specifically, violence against healthcare workers and infrastructure is not new there. Just look up the murders of Dr. Ayman Abu Alouf, nurse Razan al-Najjar, and paramedic Musa Abu Hassanin, who were killed in 2018 while they were working. I already cited Dr. Tariq's injuries by sniper attack at a peaceful Gazan protest in 2018. No evidence was ever provided to justify these unprovoked attacks. They were internally investigated and dismissed, no one held to account. We contend because they were not independently investigated, such attacks have now escalated in ways we could not have imagined, but we cannot be surprised by either. Accountability and reparation are excellent teachers if anyone is brave enough to enforce them. U.S. State Department spokesman Matt Miller said on March 25th, just 5 days ago, regarding the most recent atrocities against healthcare workers and civilians in Gaza, we have received written reassurances that are required in the memo. In each case, these assurances were made by a credible, high-level official in the partner government who has the ability and authority to make decisions and commitments about the issues at the heart of the assurances. We've had ongoing assessments of partner governments' compliance with international humanitarian law, Miller added. So we are to trust that none of those high-level officials have ever been found to fabricate evidence of atrocities committed by Palestinians, have never vocalized genocidal intent nor planned it, despite internationally presented evidence for decades to the contrary. Mr. Miller's final comment was, "We have not found them to be in violation either when it comes to the conduct of war or the provision of humanitarian assistance. We view those assurances through that ongoing work we have done." Ladies and gentlemen, the accused said it was not guilty in a memo. And that's the proof that healthcare workers in Gaza are safe, not kidnapped, maimed, tortured, or killed, and are safely treating their parents who just happened to die 40,000 times and counting. That is horrifyingly absurd. I'll tell you what the memo is proof of. No one is coming for us. No one in any position of authority is going to advocate for our healthcare colleagues on the front lines in Gaza or anywhere else in the world now that these dangerous precedents have been set. Healthcare workers and their clinical settings the world over are now legitimate targets as a result of what we are seeing. Persistent violence with impunity on the international stage, fueled, funded, and most egregiously, absolved of wrongdoing by our own governments. Ours, the epitome of democracy, the city on the hill. Well, folks, the city on the hill is burning. As American physicians and healthcare workers, we know what it is when our government abandons us to fend for ourselves in employed positions, in private practice, and certainly during a pandemic. Given that history and the looming threat of open season violence now on medical personnel and facilities globally, only we as healthcare professionals can raise our collective voices for nothing less than a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, in solidarity with our professional colleagues to end the bloodshed and suffering. To any medical system that cites 1,200 deaths and offers support via emails or a memo to its employees suffering vicarious trauma, it must not fail to also acknowledge the 40,000 lives taken for them and offer support to its employees suffering vicarious trauma. Memos will be accepted. Medical systems have failed to do both 6 months in, despite many of them claiming the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. They reek of virtue signaling, exceptionalism, and exclusion. We cannot be a collective of healthcare workers with lip service. We have to start acting like it. Support all medical personnel regardless of ethnicity or religion, without doxing, without harassment, without propaganda, and mean it. As international sanctions are pursued against the partner government Mr. Miller unequivocally believes because of a written memo, international sanctions against the United States must be pursued as well. As a collective of healthcare workers, we must demand this because we bear witness even if it's against ourselves. That's the whole purpose of our M&M practice and culture, morbidity and mortality. What are our own deficiencies? What did we contribute to this problem? And how can we do better? Both these nations are attempting to rewrite internationally accepted terms and moral standards, insulting no one's intelligence, but displaying their own lack of it. Their exceptionalism puts all of us at risk, healthcare workers on the front lines the most. Both of these rogue nations are guilty of bombing and attacking civilians and medical personnel with American weaponry, impeding humanitarian food and medical aid, showboating paltry humanitarian efforts, and abusing the material and human medical resource losses in Gaza by literally building their own economic beachfront dreams with the bones and carnage of Palestinian bodies and home on more land and resources they very clearly and openly intend to abscond. The killing of healthcare workers in Gaza against international law must serve as a wake-up call for all of us. We cannot allow such atrocities to continue unchecked. Our governments have been silent for so long because they intend to be silent forever. They cannot be trusted to protect us and our sacred work, hence the escalation and debut of new aberrations in ethical conduct against healthcare we see today, at home and in Gaza. We must stand united in our condemnation of violence and injustice against all people and work tirelessly towards a future where all healthcare workers can fulfill their sacred duty without fear of persecution or harm. May we see and celebrate a happy National Doctors' Day for doctors of a free Palestine. Thank you. I'd like to first thank you for your patience, and then I'm going to introduce Dr. Fida Wisha, who's going to speak next.
Thank you so much for coming out. My name is Fidawisha, Fidaawishah. I am a Palestinian mother of two and a daughter of Gaza, with my entire family still residing there. I am a practicing pediatric radiologist in the US. Today, I want to dedicate this segment to my mother's uncle and all of the others who were not killed by a bomb. November 23, 2023. A 68-year-old man suffering from cancer endured a forced 10-hour walk on foot from the north to the south, experiencing excruciating pain that most of us cannot personally comprehend or relate to. There was a rare moment of reception when my mom received a phone call from her uncle in the north of Gaza, who was diagnosed with cancer last year. He's in pain, and he has no access to medical attention in the north, as the entire health system has collapsed. He has no option but to walk the dreaded 10-hour walk to the south, so he does. A day later, he calls my mother again. He's weeping from what he had seen, stories she shared with me and some she couldn't. He said, "It was raining heavily. They started early in the morning. They walked for hours until they approached the checkpoint. Soldiers in tanks forced them to sit on the muddy ground, making them all wet, cold, and stained with mud. His family had a 2-month-old baby. Her mother had wrapped her in blanket to protect her. During the checkpoint, the soldiers ordered that the mother unwrap the baby so they can monitor every single inch of her little body and crush her mother's soul. An old lady falls down in front of them. One of them goes to help. The soldiers start shooting. The old lady says to the guy, "Ruh ya ibni, ana msamhak. Please go, my son. You have my forgiveness." The guy leaves with a sight he will never forget. I tell this story to my sister, and she says that wasn't the worst she had heard. January 3rd, 2024. My sister Haneen says death has many shapes in Gaza. I woke up to the news. Do you remember the 10-hour walk my mother's uncle had to endure from the north to the south? He eventually made it to the south, where he was hospitalized. Unfortunately, he developed several complications. Medicine in Gaza is now scarce, only a Band-Aid one. His name was on the list to receive treatment outside the Strip, but it required clearance from Israel. His clearance was pending from November until yesterday, January 2nd. He waited and hoped. Yesterday, he passed away. He couldn't leave Gaza to receive the necessary treatment he needed. He was killed, not with a bullet, not with a bomb, not by tank shelling, but slowly, with cancer pain and complications, in agony, in silence. And the medical community was watching in silence. This fate awaits many Gazans. Those who survive the bombings will face an onslaught of disease, chronic illnesses, injury complications, starvation, and mental anguish. Even those who manage to survive will carry a lifelong burden of psychological trauma. This situation is not new to Gaza, but it has worsened significantly since October. Gaza has been under siege for the last 17 years. Patients with chronic illnesses or life-threatening conditions would suffer greatly before being allowed to leave Gaza for treatment, and some would pass away even before clearance. Today, we stand here to demand an immediate ceasefire in honor of my uncle's soul and the countless lives lost in this ongoing genocide. It is our duty as medical professionals who took the oath to speak out against these atrocities and advocate for the well-being of every individual, regardless of their nationality or ethnicity. Our demands are clear. Publicly call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire. Insist that Israel immediately restore electricity, water, food, medical supplies, telecommunications, and fuel, and allow unhindered humanitarian aid to the population. Unequivocally condemn the attacks on healthcare facilities and call for their protection. Condemn the abduction, detention, torture, and killing of healthcare workers, and demand their immediate release, and divest from investment and all holdings that sustains Israel occupation and apartheid regime, that profit from or sustain its illegal settlements, or that have provided Israel with military equipment, weapons, or funding, and end the genocide. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Isha. The evidence is overwhelming, the damage is irreparable, and the voices of the victims are clear and urgent. The time for silence and inaction has passed. The time for decisive, unwavering action is now. We, the healthcare workers in Arizona, have set our demands with the gravest urgency. To our healthcare institutions and those vested with the power to effect change, stand on the right side of history for human rights, medical ethics, and the sanctity of life that knows no borders. For our fellow healthcare professionals who want to make a difference, we extend an invitation to join our APSA Healthcare Committee. Join us for an open meeting on Saturday, April 20th, to further our commitment to supporting Palestine in its time of need. Also, please scan this QR code on the podium or go to bit.ly/pledge4Palestine to sign a pledge that will send a powerful message to Biden that you stand against genocide. Let today be remembered as the day healthcare workers across Arizona stood in solidarity for Palestine. Together, let us forge a path towards healing, liberation, and justice. Thank you.